the way I would always describe our project is it's a very material copper deposit with a massive gold credit. So that's approximately 100 million pounds of copper and about 100,000 ounces of gold, recoverable gold, for 22 years as defined by our PEA.
Hello, welcome to Assay TV. Today I'm joined once again by Sam Lee, who is President and CEO of North Isle Copper and Gold. Sam, fantastic to see you joining us from Vancouver. Your project there, a copper project on Vancouver Island. You've got a 50-kilometer trend, and you've got a PEA on the project, came out in January. Very interesting time to be in copper, I think, in Canada. Critical mineral for the energy transition. Tell us a little bit about this, the situation, the status of the project with regards to sort of government support and community support there in Canada.
Absolutely, Lou. It's great to see you again, and thanks for having me on your show. It has been a few months, and we've made incredible progress, not only as a company, but certainly as a country, as it relates to the definition of what we deem as critical metals. So Canada last week, I'm sure a lot of your audience members have seen, came out with their critical metals strategy, and that's earmarking a significant amount of money towards developing projects that are critical metals. And within the context of about 20 critical metals, they've identified 5 critical metals specifically that are key to the progress of Canada and Canada becoming the epicenter for these projects moving forward. Copper is indeed one of those critical metals, and our project is, as you say, based in British Columbia, a region where the world has really converged to as it relates to defining and looking at projects and being quite aggressive in consolidating these projects. Our project specifically is a copper dominant copper gold porphyry. So as you know, over 80% of the world's copper come from these types of porphyry deposits. It does have a very significant gold component to it, but the way I would always describe our project is it's a very material copper deposit with a massive gold credit. So that's approximately 100 million pounds of copper and about 100,000 ounces of gold, recoverable gold, for 22 years as defined by our PEA. So in all respects, this is a very significant project for us and for our shareholders and for certainly our country.
And as well as your relationships with the government, also local communities and First Nations. I believe you just made an agreement with your local First Nation partners.
Correct. And so I think the strategy around critical metals is really, think of a Venn diagram, which intersects the environment and community and specifically First Nations. And that intersection point is where Canada's focus is going to be placed. Right now, we announced last week an agreement with one of our First Nation partners, which I would categorize as a very strong agreement that essentially is a consent-based agreement that sees us both go arm in arm to the government as we seek out our permits. This is a really critical point because in the past, there was no such effort. And quite frankly, the government has really been encouraging this level of engagement for quite some time now. So from what I can tell, this agreement really is a strong movement forward as it relates to the question around reconciliation. So what that really does for us and our project is that it brings a lot more transparency up front, as opposed to waiting until the referral period later on as we go through the permitting process. So it gives a lot more transparency. It potentially reduces the time frame for permitting. And most importantly, it's the right thing to do. We absolutely believe that our partners in our First Nation partners in this project are critical to the project moving forward. And that's the essence of the agreement that we struck last week.
Excellent. And just so if you just remind us where the project is at the moment. You've got this, as I mentioned, 50-kilometer mineralized trend, and you've got two projects, Red Dog and Hushamu, where you've got an NI 43101 resource there, and a PEA on those two projects, yeah?
Correct. So our project, our overall mineral resource is approximately a billion, close to a billion tons of resources, of which about 600 million tons is used to define the economics in the preliminary economic assessment that I just described. It's say copper, gold, porphyry in that 600 million tons. It's approximately, let's say 65% copper and about 32% gold by revenue. And so that's defined by the two projects, as you mentioned, Hushamu and Red Dog. That is but 2 of 7 projects that we are focused on across our 50-kilometer porphyry district. So this porphyry district, I think that one of the most unique things about it is that it is a very industrial area on Vancouver Island, north of Vancouver Island. It's been the home to mining, logging, and fishing for over 100 years. BHP had a mine there for over 25 years. That was in production, very similar copper and gold profile, and all of that existing infrastructure is still in place. And so our access roads, for example, go from Port Hardy, which is the nearest town, into our property. It's about a 40-minute drive along a paved road. So we don't have to go out and permit an access road that, clearly these days take much longer sometimes than permitting a mine. We certainly don't have to build a camp. The facilities that BHP Utah used as part of their operations still remain intact. There are 2 substations that drive off of renewable power, hydroelectric power. To the north of us is one of the largest wind farms in British Columbia that produces 99 megawatt hours. And of course, there's a port that's about 25 kilometers away from us. That is arguably the closest deep sea water port from continental America to Japan, which is where BHP sold its copper and moly concentrate. So when I describe the second facet of our government's focus and will, it's reducing the footprint of projects, of making sure that the environmental implications of any project are within reason, and certainly the net benefits outweigh the net disruption. And we believe very strongly that because this is a project that is situated in a very industrial area in British Columbia, and it's so close to pre-existing infrastructure, it really does limit that disruption.
And in 2022, you've been doing some further exploration, further expanding, potentially expanding the resources, yeah? Tell us a little bit about what you've achieved this year.
Sure, and I think when you talk about when projects become of interest to different people, size is a relative thing. And for a gold project, this is already a massive project. For a copper project, we're kind of bordering on that, major when majors actually open their eyes up to, north of 1 billion tons. And so what our focus really is twofold. One is going after the stuff that we believe as a junior company we're capable of going after, and that's the near surface, higher grade zones within the porphyry. So just approximately 3 kilometers north of our project is a discovery target called Northwest Expo. We've released our drilling coupled with historical drilling that shows that we've been hitting intercepts of about 1 to 1.2 grams per ton of gold equivalent within the porphyry. So this is 80 to 100 meter length that obviously we believe is continuous from our main project. And so to put that in perspective, global porphyries on average have gold grades of about 0.4 to 0.5 grams per ton. This is about 1 to 1.2 from the drilling that we've we've seen rather. And it's about 3 to 4 times higher the grade of our current resource profile. So this is quite significant. And thus far, through our drilling in 2022, we've defined an area of approximately 40 to 50 million tons that we're looking to put into a resource early next year. So that has a lot of implications as it relates to how we look at our current project and how we could potentially define what we would call as a starter project. Right now, the size of the project being contemplated for the overall PEA is about 70,000 tons per day. So, again, I would say that's a kind of a medium size, medium capital intensity copper project with a massive gold credit. So if we have something that is obviously smaller, higher grade, and close to surface, which we believe we do have in Northwest Expo, that could also give possibilities around what a lower capital intensity project looks like. But the reality is, I firmly believe we are progressing into the part of a copper cycle where you want these projects bigger, not smaller, and Absolutely. You could always displace the first 5-10 years of lower grade ore with higher grade ore. So that's also a part of the project development process that we're progressing as well in 2023.
Excellent. So what are the timelines for moving this forward towards sort of a pre-feasibility study?
Yeah, so that's a good question. As I mentioned, I think the key critical path item here is certainly our First Nations negotiations and relationships, and we've certainly been able to advance that to the point where we're comfortable to advance our work rapidly and expeditiously. We are currently looking at completing our infill program in 2023, coupled with our exploration programs, as I said, at Northwest Expo, and also our surface work at another area called Pemberton Hills. Now, Pemberton Hills is approximately 7 kilometers away from our project and approximately the same distance from BHP's project. The really interesting thing about this project is that it's deeper. It's massive in terms of the system, defined by about a 6.5 kilometer lithocap by about 1.5 kilometers. Lithocaps traditionally are not found associated with porphyries in British Columbia. A lot of the porphyries in British Columbia effectively don't have that indicator that we all know and understand as being the cap to a much larger porphyry system that we typically would see in South America, Chile, and Peru. And so that's something that really does excite us. And we've done a lot of work on this project in the past, and certainly with our joint venture with Freeport, and now completing an IP and MAG survey that we will be able to release in the next couple of weeks and months. And so that really is going to be the last piece of the puzzle as it relates to drill targeting. So this is something that we're, separately from project advancement, something that we are really focused on, and sometime in early Q1 of next year, we'll be able to unveil that to the market.
Excellent. So you've got a lot going on there. And in terms of sort of funding for all of this, how's that looking?
Yeah, so I think in terms of our exploration programs, we're fully funded. Clearly, it's something that the market, in the condition that we are today in the last couple of months, really is something that they want us to focus on. On the project development side, clearly there is going to be a need to raise capital as we keep on going through the de-risking phases. We're doing that judiciously. As I said before on this podcast, the ownership structure is very tight. We could speak to over 50% of the shareholders on one hand, and we could probably speak to the remaining 25% in two, and then the rest are in close hands. So I think from our perspective, to be very judicious around our capital allocation and our dilution levels is going to be critical to us. Having said that, I think that we are advancing some of these really critical path items, as I mentioned, with First Nation relationships, environmental baseline, but also on the metallurgical work that we initiated about 3 months ago. And so this is work that is focused on increasing the recoveries on the gold. And so right now, as I think I mentioned, the 100,000 ounces of gold that for 22 years, that's post recoveries, and that's based on a 50% recovery. So that's 50% that goes to our account, 50% that goes into the gang, into the waste. So right now, the copper does report out very nice. It reports to chalcopyrite associated with chalcopyrite mineralization. So it's very straightforward. And so as much as we can, we'd like to move some of the gold and report as much as the gold to that copper concentrate as possible. We're also looking at a potential cyanide leach of the pyrite concentrate, which could provide incremental recoveries. We know historically that projects that are in this region can recover up to about 70% of the gold. And so any sort of incremental amount from 50, 60, 70% is going to have a huge impact on our economics. And I think that is, entirely achievable based on what we're seeing today. So that program should be completed within H1 of 2023, and look forward to reporting that to the market.
Absolutely. No, if you can get those numbers up, that'd be excellent. Well, it's a great time to be in copper, and it sounds like you've got a lot of work ahead of you, but exciting times for the company. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sam Lee of North Isle Copper and Gold.
Thank you very much, Leo. Take care.